So I think we are all there. So welcome back to people, to the participants online. We can see you, Frido. Are there other ones connected?
Can you also see my slide?
Too, and Geraldine also. So let's go on, Frido. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, my apologies for not being there in person. I couldn't imagine on Monday with my feeling very weak and bad to go 6 hours to Budapest, but I regret not being there with you. Anyway, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak online. I suggested this title, The Ethical Aspects of Radiological Protection for Offspring and Next Generations. But I have to say that Thierry called his presentation preliminary considerations, and if you show the next slide, I called it very preliminary. I cannot move the slides myself, no? Somebody has to move the slides. Yes, so I said very preliminary considerations because I don't think there's much in the literature about these questions. We haven't discussed particularly about these questions in TG 94, which prepared ICRP 138. There is something in the new draft document for ethical considerations for medicine, which I will show you, but it is very, very preliminary, very rough. And also I have to say that this offspring and next generations has never been my focus topic as a radiobiologist. The closest I got to it was when I was working in the 90s. I was working in Essen in Germany in the lab of Christian Streffer. You know that this lab was very, had a strong component of research in embryonal effects. And of course, I was exposed to the discussions, and it was all happening in the next door lab. But I sometimes say that my closest involvement with it was that sometimes on the weekends I had to go in and feed the mice and catch the mice that had escaped from their cages. So that was my involvement in embryonal research. But I hope I can at least point out some interesting points where our topic cross cuts with ethics of radiological protection. In the next slide, I give you a summary of what you probably know. That is that ICRP 138, the first publication of ICRP to really explicitly address ethical questions, came up with a set of 4 core values: beneficence and non-maleficence. There are 2, but they're kept together here. Then prudence, justice, and human dignity. We will come back to them and some examples later. And in addition to these core values, 3 procedural values were identified, that is accountability, transparency, and inclusiveness, where inclusiveness relates mainly to stakeholder involvement or stakeholder participation, so to include people that are affected by radiation exposures. Now, those of you that come from medicine know that this is very similar to the system of biomedical ethics. In the next slide, there are the principles of biomedical ethics as suggested by Beecham and Childress in 1979. And I think the book has now reached the, I don't know, 10th or 12th edition. So it is still going strong, and it has had a great influence on medical ethics. They speak about principles of biomedical ethics because it's maybe further than just clinics, but it is one of the main fundamental documents of medical ethics. And here we have 4 principles: respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. They present it in this order. And of course, there has been discussion about that. Is respect for autonomy maybe something that is only important in the so-called Western world, or is it something that is really of global importance? They claim that their principles are beyond individual preferences and are beyond cultural preferences. So they really constitute an international, global basis for medical ethics. Now, of course, these 2 sets of principles or core values had to be considered by the TG 109. Next slide, please. TG 109 is looking at ethics in radiological protection for medical diagnosis and treatment. And the group has come up with this table, which tries to combine the core values of radiological protection with the some aspects of medical ethics, and even added some more things. So the core value in radiological protection is dignity, and of course this respect for autonomy, which we find in medical ethics, is a correlate of that, or we said an additional interpretation of that. It's narrowing it down to particular patient rights from the very broad concept of dignity. Then we have beneficence and non-maleficence. And here the group thought it's very important to point out again that these 2 are to be balanced. They sometimes contradict each other. So we are looking for a balance of beneficence over maleficence. So a balance of benefits and risks. But of course, in a wider sense, this balancing is happening with all these core values or principles. We always have to see which of them in a particular situation takes precedence. We cannot always make sure that all of them are respected in to the same degree, but we sometimes have to make choices. We sometimes have to say, in this particular situation, we put all the emphasis on beneficence, and we maybe suffer some compromise in terms of autonomy or dignity or justice or whatever. The next core value, prudence, and here the group felt it was necessary to also mention precaution. Prudence is not the same as precaution, as I will show you later, but it is more narrow interpretation of prudence. Then justice is correlated here with solidarity. So it was felt that solidarity should be pointed out because it says that different groups in society, especially vulnerable groups, have to be considered extra, have to get some special attention. So it may be good not to just look at justice overall, but to look at particular underprivileged groups, for instance, or at what you call solidarity in a society, not just justice between individuals, but solidarity in society as a whole. And then we have the procedural values. Accountability and transparency are here put together, and honesty is put as an additional interpretation. Personally, I don't think that is necessary, because if you look at definitions of transparency, then honesty is always part of it. But the group felt it was necessary to point out that honesty is a more widely used term in medicine. And then we have inclusiveness, where you look at people that are affected and you include them in your decision making. And that also needs empathy. You have to empathize with them. You have to see where they are coming from. You have to see, to put yourself in their shoes, to understand what their perception is. We talked about that today. So empathy was here paired with inclusiveness. Of course, this is just the draft of TG 109. It hasn't even gone in this version, hasn't gone to the main commission yet, so there may be changes, but this is the state of the affairs at the moment. I think we now come to the application to our topic. If you can have the next slide. If we look at beneficence and non-maleficence in terms of next generation effects, of course we have to look at the benefits and the risks. Start from the right side. The risks, we have discussed some of them, or we have mentioned at least some of the genetic effects we have discussed a lot yesterday and today. Then we have to look at early embryonic death. Then we have to look at malformations. Now, here I think of malformations induced during pregnancy, not by way of intergenerational or transgenerational effects. Then we have to look at severe mental retardation, which is later in pregnancy, but which has more stronger basis epidemiologically. And we have to look at cancer induction. Again, here I was thinking not so much of the cancer induction through the germline, but cancer induction during all of pregnancy. So these are the risks that we know of, or we think of. We will talk about what we know and how much we have to apply prudence later. And of course, it has to be balanced with the benefits. We are not doing this radiation exposure for nothing. We hope to have a more precise and informative diagnostics for the mother, for instance, most of the time for the mother. And so we have this benefit, but we risk some damage on the embryo, for instance. Or, of course, it could be both parents that we get some more precise information and diagnostics for, and then we have certain risk of genetic effects. We could have more effective therapy for the mother. There is sometimes the need to do radiation therapy during pregnancy, and this is, of course, a very contentious issue. And should it be done, or does it have to be done? And under what circumstances, and what are the risks and benefits of it. Then one benefit simply is that people can work. So you do expose people working in medicine, in radiology. You don't do it, you do it in a planned way, it's a planned situation, but you don't do it on purpose, but it is a side effect of the occupational activity, of the professional activity. And if you want to reduce the risk, you have to take away the possibility for these people to work, if you want to completely take away the risk. Or you can think of an emergency situation where you would avoid evacuation, but then you would take greater risk by leaving people there during their pregnancy or even before conceiving. So again, it is a benefit that you would have. You wouldn't have to evacuate, but you would have to risk. And these have to be balanced. Probably you can think of many more benefits and risks. Now we have a problem here. Can I have the next slide, please? We have several problems. So one problem is that there are some quantitative data available from animal experiments and epidemiology on the risks. Again, we will talk about that. But there are, I think, very few quantitative data available on the other side. What really does it bring to do a CT instead of a normal X-ray analysis? Do I really need the CT? Is the diagnostic power so much higher? As far as I know, of course, I'm not 100% into this field, but recently discussed it again with Jim Malone. As far as I know, there are not many studies that give us quantitative data on what is really the benefit of a CT versus a simpler X-ray, or what is anyway the benefit of any of the radiological examinations that we do. So the relative merits of different diagnostic approaches are not clear. Even if we say that, for instance, the exposure of CT can be avoided by MRT, but then MRT is not always an alternative because certain things cannot be seen in MRT that can be seen in CT and so on. We simply have very few quantitative data. Even if the data on the right side are a bit wobbly or not so 100% clear, but I think the left side in this case is even weaker than the right side. Next page, please. Another fundamental problem, or a more fundamental problem, maybe not a practical problem, but a fundamental problem, is that benefits and risks are incommensurable in many cases. That is, they cannot really be compared because they are of different kinds. Sometimes it may be possible to compare loss of life, so similar with similar. Then we would have to quantify the risks and the benefits in quality adjusted life years or disability adjusted life years. But decision making may be much more difficult in other cases where it is between economic and social advantages and disadvantages and health effects. So the medical doctor may be under pressure from his or her hospital to use the CT equipment because the insurances are paying better for it than for simpler analyses. So it is, in that case, is an economic question against a health effect. There could be other advantages as well and disadvantages that we would have to discuss, but it's very difficult to compare them because they are not on the same line. We can, of course, even ICRP has tried to convert everything to dollars or euros, but I think ICRP has given up on that very much. It is not that easy to convert health effects and deaths and social advantages into economic measures. Another problem is that the groups that benefit and have the risks are not always the same. So those who benefit may be different from those who take risks. For instance, the mother versus the embryo. So the mother has a benefit, but the embryo has a risk, or this generation has a benefit and the next generations have a certain risk. And this is at the same time, of course, a question of justice. We'll come back to that, and one of dignity. So who do I take serious? Do I take the embryo serious as a person with dignity or not? We will come back to that. So much about beneficence and non-maleficence. Now, prudence. I said prudence is different from precaution, and I think that is very important for our topic as well, or in particular. The precautionary principle, as defined by the so-called Wingspread Conference, I think in the 80s, says that when an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. So you immediately see the relationship with what we discussed yesterday and today. Cause and effect relationships are not fully established. On the other hand, you also see that there should be probably something, so you don't just react to claims. There will be some effect. You should have some indication, some preliminary evidence that there could be something, and then you have to weigh whether the evidence is strong enough to already do something, already take some precautionary measures, or if the evidence is so weak that you can safely ignore it. So that's an ethical question then. How far do you go in taking claims of effects that have not been shown scientifically or is clearly fully established scientifically? How do you take them, how much do you take them into account? Prudence respects this, so it includes precaution, but it also considers other aspects affecting society. So in a way, it combines precaution with solidarity, because solidarity is this taking account of the needs of the rest of society and the other people around. And I think that's incorporated very nicely in the ALARA principle, or in the principle of optimization, which includes ALARA. The probability and magnitude of exposure should be kept as low as reasonably achievable, economic, societal, and environmental factors being taken into account. So yes, we should take things into account, even if we don't know for sure, but it has to be reasonable, and especially we should look at economic, societal, environmental factors to determine what is reasonable. And again, we have the same problem here, that we have different measuring sticks for economic and social, societal and environmental and health effects. So it's not that easy to determine what is reasonable. Next slide, please. I give you a few examples of where I think prudence comes in our topic. You have seen this, the first one, which is the publication of Yamada, which was presented yesterday by her colleague, the malformations due to parental exposure. These are the data. This is how the data from Hiroshima, Nagasaki look at the moment. So do you consider this as fully established scientifically? No, because it has large confidence intervals. Do you consider this is something that we can ignore? No, probably not. We have to prudently take it into account, because we also have some evidence from animal experiments, and this together with the weak data here seems to indicate that something is going on. So even if it is not fully established scientifically, we have to be prudent. And I would like to add that yesterday, I think it was mentioned that prudence comes into play if we don't know anything. Certainly it comes into play in such a case, but also if we know something, but we are not sure of the something, we are not sure of the significance of it, we are not sure if the next analysis will show the same thing, we just have big error bars, then also it is a matter of prudence to take this into account, or we would have to have good arguments not to take it into account. Next example, and that, leave this slide for a moment, please, because the second example here is malformations due to exposure during the pre-implantation period. This graph there is from the Streffer group, published 1996, and it shows the difference between malformations induced during pre-implantation, that is the left curve, the one that rises earlier, and at a later stage of pregnancy. Now, you may not see that, but I think the first one says the four-cell embryo. I cannot read it myself. 4-cell embryo, and the other one is the 32 to 64 cell stage. So in the later stage, which is maybe the beginning of our organogenesis, we have a clear, in these mouse experiments, we saw a clear threshold dose, in that case a very high threshold dose of 1 gray. Up to 1 gray there was no induction of malformations in these mice at all. But if you irradiated the 4-cell embryo, which is not anywhere close to organogenesis, and which is usually assumed to react with the all or nothing, so either the embryo is rejected, it dies, or it develops normally. But here in this case, at much smaller doses, the risk of malformation rose. And it looked as if it really a stochastic effect. It is not a non-threshold effect. Of course, it has a curvature, but it's a non-threshold effect. Now, we also have to say that this was observed in genetically predisposed mice. It was not observed in a different mice strain, which was not so predisposed. It was observed to some degree in crosses of these two mice strains. So it seems to be something that is related to, I'm sorry, to genetic predisposition. But again, can we therefore ignore it for humans? Maybe humans are generally predisposed as the white mice are and not unpredisposed as the black mice are. Or maybe it is only a subgroup, it's only a vulnerable subpopulation of humanity that has this predisposition. We don't know, we simply don't know. And therefore the question is, should we not be prudent even in the pre-implantation period, because malformations could be induced there. This has very practical implications. I just recently looked at the webpage of the Czech Radiation Protection Institute, and they have a question and answer webpage. And there was somebody, a radiographer, who was asking, my husband and I have decided that we want children and we are trying to have children now. And I announced this to my boss, but my boss says that has no effect on my ability to work. Only when I am pregnant and I announce my pregnancy, then will he take me out of the control area. And of course, the boss is right. I mean, all our legal documents say that it is a matter of somebody is pregnant and then announces it, and then for the rest of the pregnancy we have a certain limit of 1 milligram for the uterus dose. But in this case here, if this is true, would that not be perhaps too optimistic? Should we perhaps have some protection for people that are about to become pregnant? Then, of course, we also have the some additional dose limits for women in reproductive age. So maybe that is enough. But at least this question has to be discussed, I think, and it's a question of prudence. We don't know how humans react. What kind of the animal experiments are representative for humans, but we have to take account of it. Next one, please. Similar considerations apply, but with a somewhat lesser degree of uncertainty to malformations. There we do have a lot of animal experiments which say that the threshold doses for malformations are somewhere in the range, usually somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 milligray, but they are still unknown for humans. So prudence means we accept this, or we take this over from mice to humans, and maybe we put a margin of safety. So we stay below that with our recommendations. And then the threshold for the induction of severe mental retardation, there we have the data from Hiroshima, Nagasaki, which seem to indicate something like a threshold dose of 200 milligray for the embryo 8 to 15, the fetus 8 to 15 weeks into pregnancy. But then I have seen people argue that, yeah, but this first point there, which is at a very small dose of what, maybe 50 milligray, that is not so clearly zero. So is it really a threshold, or is it just bad statistics and maybe it goes up much quicker? So again, is it a requirement of prudence to assume that maybe the threshold dose could be smaller than 200 milligray? Are we really prudent if we assume 200 milligray on the basis of these admittedly very weak databases of a few dozen of children exposed in pregnancy? So that's just questions. I'm not saying it's all wrong what we are doing, but I'm just raising the question, is it compatible with prudence? Next, please. Justice. In the context of radiological protection, justice is mostly discussed as distributive justice. That is, we want to avoid inequities of dose distribution, and we want to have a just distribution of benefits and risks. We want to make sure, well, not make sure, but we want to at least have control over who has the benefits and who has the risks, and is that really a fair distribution of benefits and risks within society? I mentioned this already with respect to mother and unborn child, that there are different people involved here that take benefits and risks. There's also, of course, the question of justice between generations, which is generally discussed in the literature as intergenerational equity, or you could also summarize it under the topic sustainability, because sustainability, as the Brundtland Commission has defined it in, I think, end of the 80s, the Brundtland Commission spoke about sustainability, and they defined sustainability as striving to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So if we have effects that work on the next generation, whether they are induced during pregnancy or before pregnancy, it is something that our generation induces or our generation causes, but that affects future generations, and therefore it is a question of intergenerational equity. Next one. Thierry has already mentioned this one. I don't have to go into details here, that this was really on the in the thinking of the ICRP in publication 1. It is both the burden on society due to genetic damage, and also it is something that is genetic damage and a burden to future generations. So it's a matter of justice, of intergenerational justice. It is a question of tolerable and justifiable in view of the benefits. So it's a question of beneficence and non-maleficence. And it's also, of course, a question of prudence, because this is the first recommendation of the ICRP, which really based itself on stochastic effects, and in this case on the stochastic effect of cross-generational effects, of hereditary effects. So it's a mix of different aspects, but I think we should not forget about this justice aspect, because it is between us and the people that follow us. Next one, please. Dignity is really a very difficult topic in this respect, because the values that I have discussed so far seem to be interculturally agreeable. So if you look at different expressions of cultural valuing, you will find similar considerations. Maybe sometimes the balancing between one aspect and the other could be different. So some people in Japan could be more concerned with dignity than with justice, or I'm just making it up, don't take me seriously, but there could be different different kinds of balancing. What is more important, justice or dignity or beneficence or non-maleficence? And there will be differences, and that's not too bad, as long as we agree with the basic, with the core values. But the question of the moral status of the embryo is really a minefield, because we are talking here about the new life, and it is even a question if the pre-implantation embryo should already be considered human or not. It is a question of if the implanted embryo to a certain stage where it starts with development of the nerve system, for instance, should be considered. I just give you a few examples from my research. Most Hindus, Christians, and Baha'is believe that the soul joins the body at conception, whatever that is exactly, and the embryo is therefore a human being worthy of protection, that it has personal rights. Even the first pre-implantation form of the embryo has personal rights. In contrast with that, most Jews and Muslims would argue that this early embryo is nothing but water for the first 40 days at least. Some argue for the first 120 days of pregnancy. And then on the other hand, of course, when you ask them, but does that mean that abortion is totally free and totally easily possible? They say, no, it's not. It's not. It is still objectionable, but is not as objectionable as killing a fully grown person. But the fact that it is nothing but water sounds so clear and so denigrating, but it is not. The embryo still has, even for these people, has a special status. Most Buddhists would consider the unborn just another living being, which is not to be harmed, whether human or not, it's not to be harmed. Confucians usually put the emphasis on social ties as the main sign of personhood. And then, of course, this unborn is not really a human person because it cannot have social ties yet. But again, when you ask Confucians, does that mean that abortion is totally free and unproblematic? They say no, it should not be even this non-human, not yet human thing should not be harmed unnecessarily. Next, please. So, and then of course, this is just a very, very oversimplification, which I have presented to you. If you look at the details, there are different groups and denominations and schools within these faiths who have dissenting views. Of course, you all know that religiously unaffiliated people will find other kinds of considerations more convincing. And then the question is, the relevant arguments are from related discussions, but not necessarily from discussions of radiological protection, but from discussions of abortion. So there is also a question in what way or how far they could apply to our topic if they come from abortion and its justifiability. But I think in general, we do have to give this some consideration, because as an international body, the ICRP would do well to take these arguments into consideration, especially in view of the fact that, of course, there is a strong tendency to secularization in the countries that most of us come from here in this workshop in Europe and North America, even in Japan. Strong secularization, but in other parts of the world, this is by far not the case. Religious views continue to play an important role in other parts of the world. And are we just to ignore these views when we make our considerations or when we make our recommendations, or should we, as an international body, show some respect, empathy, if you want, to the consideration of these people that we may not agree with, but that have different views on the status of the embryo than we have. Next, please. I think I will not, in the interest of time, I'm already talking too long. I will not go into the details of this. Just if we want to do that, we can do it later. TG 109 has in its draft document a couple of scenarios where we constructed a case, partly from experience, partly from imagining what could happen. And so Julia Magenta is a woman that gets a CT and later understands that she is pregnant. And next page, please. Next page, please. I don't want to go into the details. So the case is described, and it is described what they do and how they decide and how they communicate with Mrs. Magenta. And the final slide, or the next slide, the final part of this discussion in the document of TG 109. Please, the next one. Yeah, it's then for each of these scenarios, there is a table which discusses this 6 pairs or triplets of values and assign smileys and frownies to them. And then from looking at this table, you see overall, was that solution that people took in that particular situation, was that something in agreement with the set of values which are proposed here in the document or not? In this case, you see clearly there are many more frownies than smileys. It's not just a matter of counting, of course, but usually it comes out from these tables that you have a very clear view of what was correct in this situation, what was done correctly and what should have been different. We can, as I said, we can go into this if you want, but I can also, I don't know, you will probably have access to the presentations later. And this is an example of how you can practically apply these values. And the last slide says just thank you, and also says welcome to ISEEH 2022. ISEEH is the International Symposium on Ethics of Environmental Health. We have had such a symposium in the Czech Republic 4 times until now. We decided that after COVID, it's about time to have another symposium, and it will happen on the 11th to 14th, maybe only to the 13th, depends on how many contributions we have. September this year in Budweis in the Czech Republic, and you are very welcome. You just have to look at the webpage iseeh.org, and you will find some preliminary information about the program and how to register and the circumstances. Thank you very much, and apologies for my talking too much. It always carries me away if it's about ethics.
Thanks a lot. So discussion is open. Questions, comments?
This is just a basic question because I'm not familiar with all those things. Could you just explain the difference between beneficence and non-maleficence?
Yeah. Beneficence is doing good to people. I'm sorry, I should have said that. Is doing something good to people, doing something positive to people, helping them or healing them or whatever. Maleficence would be doing bad to people, harming them. Non-maleficence is the principle of do not do harm. This is the first principle in the Hippocratic Oath, for instance, do not harm people. And of course, these two are always in a balance with each other, because in many cases, in order to do good, you have to do some harm. So just very primitively, if you want to do surgery to operate on a sick heart, you have to introduce some harm. You have to cut a body open and open it, and also have some risk of this wound not healing or this patient dying on the operation table. So there is always, no, not always, but very often there is both involved. And this is why ICRP wanted these two to be put in one line together. We can most of the times not just do good to people, but we almost always have some negative side effects, some harmful aspects, which we have to counterbalance.
Yeah, thank you. I have another question, because at the beginning, you introduced a difference between precautionary and prudence.
Mm-hmm.
And then with regard to heritable effect, what is your feeling? We are mainly addressing precautionary aspect, or do we have to go more in terms of prudence? This morning we discussed the prudent assumption. In the text quoted from previous ICRP publication, we were mentioning a prudent attitude. What could be the recommendation with regard to that, or is it mainly a semantic distinction?
Yeah, it is to a great extent a semantic distinction. We discussed it in TG 94. Should we not just speak about precaution, because even the ICRP mentions precaution in 103. But then the members of the main commission that were with us said that some people react very allergic to the notion of precaution, because they think it means that you as soon as there's a slight risk somewhere, you stop doing anything, which it doesn't mean, because there has to be some reasonable evidence, as I said. But still, prudence is a wider concept. And my personal feeling is that maybe in the case of transgenerational effects, it's more a question of precaution, because we just want to take them, we want to consider them, we don't want to leave them out. But on the other hand, we saw that they contribute only a small portion, even if that portion is doubled now or tripled from what it used to be, it is still a small portion of the complete detriment, and therefore it is probably not what will be driving the optimization process with respect to economic and societal considerations. But I don't know, maybe it will. Societal also means that we look at the worries of people and for their next generation. So maybe it will. So no clear answer there. But I think the point is that simply it is clear that ICRP wanted there the wider concept of prudence, because it does take into account this as low as reasonably achievable, taking into account other considerations.
Just maybe a question for clarification for me. Do I understand correctly that precautions mean we are not sure if there are risks, so we prefer not to take action, and prudent is more, we know that there are risks, but they are uncertain, so we exaggerate, so we take higher prudent approach?
I wouldn't make the distinction there. Can you go back to that slide? I mean, it could be the fourth or fifth slide, perhaps. Because it says that the precautionary principle usually says that we should take action even if we don't know for sure. Yeah, there it is. Even if we don't know for sure, we haven't established the cause and effect relationship fully, but we have some evidence, but we haven't established it fully. We should take precautionary measures. We should do something about it. We should do set some limits or avoid irradiation or whatever. And I think the difference with prudence is that it takes in more considerations. It then says, okay, we know something, we have some indication. We are still unsure. but we have some indication. But we also now consider the reasonability of taking measures. We could put endless money in this to prevent exposure, for instance, but it would be forbiddingly expensive. And given what we know about it, even if it is preliminary knowledge, we are not willing to spend that amount of money because even if the effect is a bit bigger than what we think it is, this amount of money is not reasonable to be spent there, something like that. So I see the difference really in this widening the scope, not just looking at the risk itself and how well we know about it, but taking into account all these surrounding issues.
But just to stay on the same idea, isn't it the way we should ask Group A again, or the scientists working on heritable effects? So specifying the different types, malformation and chronic disease and Mendelian results, and to ask them what is their point of view. Are we in a situation for which we have some indication but no certainty? So in that case, we have to do something, or are we in the second? Well, maybe to ask them what is their feeling about what is the level of knowledge, and is it different from what we had in 2000? Because I'm afraid they're not going to be able to provide any quantitative relationship, but maybe this kind of question can be helpful. So.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And they should not only the answer what could possibly be there, but they should mainly answer the question, how certain or uncertain are we about it?
And should we consider also a level of dose difference between very high doses and low? Because I think the situation is different. But at least we have to consider different categories of effects separately, because I hope it's different according to the disease.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, just once again about this prudence and precaution. Maybe precautionary principle sounds a bit as if we are hesitating and don't want to take any action, whereas prudence sounds that we are more proactive and can consider action even though there are uncertainties. Is this a bit the notion behind?
Maybe from these wordings that I chose, I mean, of course, you find different wordings for the precautionary principle. There's also a suggestion by the 1992 World Environmental Summit in Rio de Janeiro, which sounds a bit different and found its way into European legislation. I would have to look it up. So I think originally it was worded against those people that are too hesitant. It was meant as counteracting those voices that say that we don't know anything about this, or we don't know enough about that, so let's not do anything. We just, as long as we are not sure, we just refrain from doing anything. And so the people that put this together said that no, even if we don't know for sure, even if we don't know fully scientifically what is happening, we have to take some action. We should do something about it, just out of caution.
It sounds a bit more actively, right?
Yeah.
I have another question with regard to justice, because with justice, you mentioned a possible conflicting interest of mother and unborn child. Do you have the feeling that this question, because it's a very sensitive issue, and then what what does it mean for radiation protection in this perspective? Is it something very specific to medical exposure? Do we have to consider that more broadly to all type of exposure? And then where do we put a burden on individual, or is it something more global for different protective action?
I don't think I have an answer for that. I just I pointed this out that it could be conflicting interests, but then of course I am also aware, and I maybe should have said that these two are never completely separable, because the unborn child, of course, has an interest in a healthy mother. So if the mother needs some kind of therapy or some kind of diagnosis for a certain therapy, then it is also in the interest of the child that the mother gets the best medical help or advice that she can get. And on the other hand, the mother, of course, will never be separated from the interests of her own unborn child, or most of the time she will not be. It is very artificial to construct here a conflict. I just wanted to point out that the people that are affected are different people, can be different people in different situations, and can even be different generations. But it is not, and this is a question that is very much discussed with the benefits and risks, and the question of justice, that are we giving the benefits to the same people as the risks, or is it different groups or different people? We had, just as an example, I don't know if it's an example, but we had, again, in Essen, I heard from many people that we, at the time, early 90s, we had the director of the human genetics department. Whenever a mother came to him, and a pregnant woman came to him, and she said, I have just been x-rayed and then I have found out that I'm pregnant or something like that, he would always recommend abortion. And I found that very strong and not justified by any of the things that we know here, because we know something about, we have some indication of some threshold doses, but that was the attitude of at least this particular human geneticist, that he said you can become pregnant again, it's not so important, the unborn child is something that is not replaceable. Sorry to be so blunt, but this is his argument, and so he made this recommendation. I hope that this is not a general or widely found attitude, but it was encountered at the time, and I think you could also encounter it these days.
Then coming back to the discussion we had this morning, is it something that may influence the selection of number of generation to be considered? Because if we have intergenerational equity, does it mean that we may have some criteria of decision or influence the decision when we say that finally we take into account only the first two generations, because then it doesn't matter too much? Is it something to be considered? But then we cannot integrate to the 100 generation, or it's maybe a matter of
maybe there are other people in the group that are more qualified to speak about that, but I would say at least it has to be revisited. I think the ICRP, as I said this morning, ICRP made some effort to justify this, to argue why it should be just 2 generations and not more. So I think at least they were on the safe side of making an argument and giving reasons for it, but that doesn't mean that it has to be there so forever. We have to revisit the question. And also, if I may add this, yesterday it struck me, one of the pictures, I don't know which presentation it was, there was the exposure of the mother and the embryo, and then also the germ cells in the embryo. So if the embryo is already at a later stage of development, and there has already differentiation happened, and the germ cells for the second generation are already there, then this is also something that should be maybe considered. Maybe again, we don't have evidence. Probably we have even less evidence than for first generation effects, but I think one should at least give some thought to it.
Yeah, I have another question with regard to dignity. It's not only a question because you put the question to ICRP. You say that as an international body, ICRP would do well to take this argument into consideration with regard to dignity and the aspect of moral status of the embryo. At the end of your presentation with a different slide on dignity, I was not clear about what could be the position with regard to that. We have not to enter into the discussion of some deep moral consideration, which are different according to the religion and so on. But then we have to consider the embryo. Is it a question of moral status or not? Can you clarify that, and what could be one proposal for ICRP? I fully understand that we need to take care of the embryo, and in the different examples that you presented, independently of the status of embryo, you need to take care of that and not to harm the embryo. Is it sufficient, or do we need to go further?
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt the need to raise this question, but I can mention maybe one practical example of a discussion around this. We recently had a meeting of a working group in Germany where the title was, for the time being, was in utero effects. And then somebody said, and it was supported by others, that in utero effects means that we do not have to care about the pre-implantation embryo. Because the pre-implantation embryo in the strict sense of the word is not in utero. It's not yet there. It's not yet implanted in the uterus. So it is not in utero exposition. Let's not talk about it. That's too messy. It's too complicated. We don't know enough. There's all these contradictory evidence from Schreffer and others. So we just keep it out. And that's a question of dignity. Do you consider this thing, this fertilized egg cell, do you consider this of having some status to be protected, or do you just, if it dies, it dies. If it survives, then it becomes a protectable or an entity worthy of protection. So there is some practical implication of how you consider these different entities or the different stages of this entity. It's not just a matter of some semantics, I think, but it is a question of for what kind of exposure situations during pregnancy or from fertilization to birth do you want to make recommendations? But I would, sorry, I'm talking too much, and I would love to hear input from the other members of the group. Maybe some of you feel that this is all, we can ignore it. Okay, fine, but let's address it.
So for regarding this issue, so my first thought was independently on how we see the embryo or the cells before the implantation, what we want to protect is the offspring. So even if we are not sure, or there are some discussion about what would be the status, but what we want to protect is that what is coming out, so to say, at the end, just said. So that would mean for me, independently on the status, we need to have some protection. Then Frido said, if we don't consider this first group of cells a living thing, then it doesn't need to be protected. And so probably that would lead also to some discussion. But okay, so the idea would be we are not protecting these mass of cells or these early embryo, but we are protecting what is the child and the child that is coming out. I had a little bit of problems. So I was wondering if we want to, in your previous slides, you had a little bit some description of what some religions think, how is it? And I don't know if we should go into this discussion, because you always will find someone who is not represented here, and then there is a discussion, what is religion, what is philosophy, what is so it's an interesting thing for discussion, but I probably we shouldn't take a statement in the documents. And the other thing, I don't know if I missed, but maybe we should also consider the fact when you have some exam, well, because you had this issue that the person who gets the benefit from a radiological exam is not the same as the person who gets the risk. But we should maybe also consider the fact when the exam is done for the child, not for the mother, or the therapy is done for the child. So in that case, I don't know if it's in that case, this will mean that we have to another type of consideration of the risk.
Mm.
Other comments about that? I had one comment, but it was when you, Frido, when you discussed about precaution and prudence, you said that about the discussion was about the risk of malformation. And you said that finally, from the Japanese study, we have some indication, even if it's not proof, even if it's not enough to quantify those risk relationship and so on. But in fact, you said that it was to apply to population in the age of reproduction. In fact, I don't know. I think that's something that we can think about. What is the population at risk for heritable effects? Because in the Japanese study, it was based on births from 48 to 53.
Mm-hmm.
It means that it was for birth in 53. So if it's a young girl of 20 years, it means that at the time of bombing, she was only 10. So finally, maybe we should not consider only exposure at the time of adult age, but also during, also maybe that's a question again that we have to the researchers.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have an idea of what is the time? Is there some period for which we can consider that there may be some reproductive problems or risk of malformation, or can it be more than several years? But if we trust the Japanese results, then in that case, it means that even 10 years after the bombing, So possibly for young girls that were only 10 or less than 20, at least at the time of bombing, it's possible to have an effect. So
Yeah.
That's just a comment. In fact,
Yeah,
it was
very
not
good.
related to your. But
Mhm.
I catched it in your presentation.
Completely agree. Yeah.
It's something that we have to think about that. To what population do we think protection or precaution has to be, or prudence has to be applied? Only after reproduction age, or already during childhood?
Mhm.
Again, I'm sorry, it's not an answer. That's
That's it. Yeah. No, but we have to ask that question. That's right. I think Geraldine had a question or a comment.
Thanks. Thanks, Frido. Yeah, just about the protection during the pre-implantation phase. And I mean, I suppose medical exposures, certainly of patients, are somewhat easier in that they are planned. So we do have some opportunity to apply protection should we choose to do so. And certainly for higher dose examinations, it would be usual to apply the 10-day rule, which schedules examinations in the first 10 days of the cycle. So during that time, you shouldn't have an embryo or fetus present. Now that tends only to be applied in many institutions and countries for the higher dose exams, rather than right across the board. Some institutions, including this one, we would apply it for anywhere where the uterus is in or close to the primary beam, so where there is a risk of exposure. So, but the argument against that, and using what's called the 28-day or the missed period rule, is that if you expose somebody in that latter part of the cycle, there's very few cells there, so not much of a target, and if you have a hit, it's likely to be an all or nothing effect. So you're not trying to protect at the pre-implantation or very early implantation period, where it's very hard to establish whether somebody's pregnant or not at that early time, particularly with point of care tests. So, I think our approach in medicine, we do have opportunities to be more cautious than you might elsewhere. For the staff, that was interesting, the example that was cited in Frida's presentation, where the radiographer wanted to be redeployed when she was trying to get pregnant. That would never happen in the normal course of the events. That wouldn't happen until pregnancy was declared, if even then. So it's an interesting consideration. But certainly for patients, there are ways to do it, but it's practically difficult to implement. So a lot of organizations are very reluctant to do it because it reduces your scheduling capability to about a third for certain patient groups. So if you've got high dose examinations with the uterus in or close to the primary beam, you have 10 days in the month that you can scan somebody. So there's lots of patient groups where that's very challenging, not impossible, but challenging. So it's just maybe something to think about. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe some comments regarding the sensitivity of germ cells and the age dependency. In my understanding, it's different in male and female. For example, in male, the spermatogenesis, it's always like repeating, and it's continuous during the whole of man life. but in female, the oocytes only formulated on the embryon, and they dividing only from the puberty till the maybe postmenopausal period. Yes, and that's why as they are not dividing cells, they are not sensitive to the radiation compared to the men germ cells. They are dividing all the time and they are sensitive, and there are several steps on the spermatozoa division, and then they are at the stage of the stem cells, they are more sensitive compared to the more mature spermatozoids. Yes. And that's why I think the age depends on the effect you want to observe, and the end point, and the sensitivity also. I don't know. Yeah. Yes.
So if we want to translate it into protection, then protection has to be done according to the age at the time of exposure and sex. So different protection rules for males and females.
Yeah, that's an interesting question of justice also.
Here there was an issue that was mentioned yesterday by Kimberly about the age at which women have children, that the age also the age of childbearing is increasing. So if this has also an effect on the radiosensitivity of the cells and on the hereditary effects, because the older the woman, the older are also the other effects on the cells. So higher the probability to have hereditary effects which are not due to radiation. So theoretically, it would mean you have a higher incidence of baseline. So theoretically, a higher threshold also for the radiation protection, so to say.
Yeah, but then this issue of sensitivity of age at exposure, male and female, if we take into account the reproductive population and so on, progressively we move to what we discussed yesterday evening on individualization of the risk calculation. For the risk calculation, I fully understand. Then for the protection, we need to be prudent to see exactly where we go, because we can say, okay, if we take into account heritable effect or in utero exposure, then of course for medical exposure we may consider the individual and we can check if the female is exposed or not due to pregnancy and then you have all the examples that Friedo you mentioned. It's clearly addressing this aspect, but then for exposure of population or for occupational exposure, you may take some different consideration, and for ethical reason we need to, for ethical reasons, but also for efficient protection, we need to consider more average value or some criteria which will be applicable for all the population or all type of exposure. So we need to check that into account and to see how far to go in the detail of possible risk. Otherwise, we can open the box for all. We can also say that depending on the age, the type of cancer will be different, and the sensitivity to the cancer will be different, and so on. So we can do that for some type of exposure, not for all. We need to check that.
Should we be prudent?
Yeah, This is for the ethicists.
So Frido, should we be cautious or should we be prudent?
Both.
Trying to reply to what you said now, I think that in any case, when you are calculating also these detrimental risk factors, also for the radiation protection purpose, not only for the individual risk, you somehow average or weight over the population. So maybe it's an interesting thing would be to see if the population upon which we are want to average has changed in the last 20 years, which may have changed in respect to age, or so maybe this is something.
Can I? Differentiation according to age is one thing. Differentiation according to sex is another one. I mean, we are making some differentiation because women in fertile age have this additional limit of, or is that only a, Werner, you could say, is that only a German speciality that we have a dose limit for women that could become pregnant per month uterus doses? Is that also an international recommendation?
You mean the 1 millisievert for women who declare pregnancy?
Well, that's one thing, but the other thing is we have a, I think 2 millisievert per month for the uterus external.
Yes, you're right. Goes this back to ICRP? Or maybe it's a German invention.
Anyway, at least there we have already discrimination. I recently made myself very unpopular when I said in a radiation protection course that women are maybe, it seems that women are 50% more radiosensitive, so we should also reduce the dose for, what is it, professional life dose by such a factor. And then there was one lady that almost killed me because she felt that this was discriminatory. I said, I just want you to have the same maximum risk as your male colleagues, but she said, no, but you are preventing me from doing my job by limiting my dose more than the male colleagues. So we had a big discussion there. But I think that we already have some discrimination, if you want, or some differences between women and men, and maybe it does make sense to think of more than that. For instance, the question that Aidana raised, if, for instance, it would turn out that the turnover of germ cells in men leads to the fact that doses are not accumulating during their life. I mean, genetically relevant doses are not accumulating during their life, but they only affect one generation of sperms after the other. Whereas in women, it could be accumulating because the oocytes are there all the time. Of course, they are maybe in a different physiological state, but they are principally there. So they could accumulate all these DNA damage in the course of the woman's life. So even if she is, as was mentioned just now, even if she is exposed as a child, then it would still be relevant. So there could be differences there in relevant, what doses are relevant, what time distribution of doses is relevant. And I could imagine that it would make sense to differentiate between men and women in this respect.
I mean, in addition to this, this is quite practically with the discussion of the astronauts and the female astronauts in the US, where exactly at these points of the maybe higher baseline risk for cancer in women leads to a discussion if women should go to space. And at the moment, US don't have a solution for the problem.
So this was the change of NASA last year, that they set the limit and used effective dose of 600 millisievert. And the 600 millisievert was informed by the risk for a 35 years old female astronaut, because they are the most sensitive groups among astronauts. And so this means that females are not discriminated. It just means that males can fly longer.
Some women would not agree with your statement.
On a very practical point of view, so we have to continue the discussion. We are invited by Group B to join them after the coffee break to discuss. Group B is in utero exposure. So why not? I support that. We maybe have to list the questions. In my view, we have much more questions for Group A than for Group B. So maybe it's more justified to meet with Group A, but on the other side, it's only in 30 minutes, so I don't know what is feasible. Also, I'm afraid it will pose problem for the connection of people that are attending from outside. So I wanted to discuss it with all of you before we answer to.
So is it not possible for us to hack into Group B?
I think it should be possible. I think you received all the connection.
You received all the links, yeah.
But wait a minute. Don't change at the time being. Don't change at the time being. Just wait for us to know where we're going to be and if we do that or not. So,
okay.
what do you think? Is it better to go and discuss with at least one group? Is it better to discuss with Group A and try to have at least a half an hour discussion with them? Are we prepared to ask questions to Group B? Do we have precise questions for them? Because I'm afraid they have questions for us, so we have to be careful. Or do we think the next hour we better stay there and prepare our list of questions for tomorrow? That's an open question for me. Tomorrow morning. No, tomorrow morning we are still separated from 9 to 10, approximately 10:30, and the idea is that we prepare the summary and the conclusion of the group. And after why not? Why not? Maybe we can propose that. Yes, of course. Okay, so the idea is to continue to prepare the question right now and to propose them to meet rather tomorrow morning instead of today. So, yeah.
We have to discuss with Group A if they're available tomorrow morning. Like, if not, if they prefer to concentrate it on their own report, we have to discuss today. I mean, it also depends on the Group A. Yeah. And B, yes.
We can, but we have to make it short because the next session is in half an hour, so we have to agree right now.
The main question is, are we able to, or when will we finish our presentation? Because my feeling is that we just have a cloud of ideas, but how can we concentrate it? But if we meet tomorrow in the morning, we won't have time to finish our presentation.
But also maybe we can propose them not to meet for 1 hour, but to meet for only half an hour and just to exchange questions. I don't know, maybe it's too short. It doesn't seem so.
No, probably this is difficult to join Group B now because we will open the discussion, we will open a new discussion, and we will also conflict with the discussions that we should have with the joint session because with the other group. So except if they have a specific question to us and that they want to open some discussion now that we have to reflect. Otherwise, we will enter into conflict with the preparation of the joint session. And today, if we deliver already some question to Group B, we will not deliver a second time tomorrow. That, why only to Group B and not to the other group? This is a little bit confusing. Except if Group B has already some question and want.
I can ask, in that case, maybe I can ask Kimberly to send us a list of precise questions that they have from Group B to Group D. We think about that and we try to have some feedback for tomorrow afternoon. Yeah. Okay, so we is it okay for everybody? So we do not share. So stay online. We're going to stay in the same room, and I ask her for a list. And maybe I can propose the same. Maybe in the session just after that, we can prepare precise questions for Group B, and so that it's an exchange in both sides, and we discuss it further tomorrow. And we can propose the same to Group A. Yeah, the list to Group A would be longer. Yeah. Okay. So we can do that. In that case, I tell them right now before they.
So we have break now. So you can prepare your coffee again, or not, but or is it tea time? I don't know. We have schedule. We have half an hour. So we will be back in half an hour, more or less half an hour. It's okay. See you.
Thank you. And so, what do you think is the first thing to do? The discussion we had with Group A and Group B is that what we can do is to try to share a list of questions from us to them, and they are going to try to do the same. So if we can send it before tonight, it will be fine. And because of the boat trip tonight, we propose to end up at 5:30 the discussion, just to make sure that people that are not in the hotel have enough time to go back to their hotel. So how could we go on? Do we try to begin with the list of questions that we have for Group B, or Frido?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to suggest, because I raised a couple of questions indirectly because I thought that they are related to prudence, for instance, because we don't know very much. So maybe we can even go there in my presentation, but we don't need to necessarily use my presentation just because it offers something. But for instance, I would like to know what is the evidence in the pre-implantation period for an all or nothing effect, or for a kind of stochastic effect of induction of malformations. There are the Streffer data, but also I think a group in Belgium had similar data. So it's not just one group that produced such data. Then there's the question of the, sorry.
Should we share the screen? screen and write it. You already have the questions written?
No, I haven't. I haven't. But in my, if you go back to the prudence part of my presentation,
You write it?
they offer themselves there.
Okay, so I will write them down, but what was the first question once again?
I think the first question is whether the all or nothing rule, which is widely assumed for the pre-implantation embryo, is really still the best we have, or is there some evidence for induction of malformations during the pre-implantation period? Yes, there is some evidence, but it is connected, as I said, to predisposition, genetic predisposition. And the question is, how much could it apply for humans?
Come on, this was way too long. I need a short question. And what I wrote right now is the all or nothing rule still valid for the pre-implantation rule?
Okay.
Phase.
Good.
Okay.
And the related question to that is, there's evidence for some stochastic induction of malformation during the pre-implantation period, which seems to be related to genetic predisposition. Is there any evidence for humans that this could happen?
So I would like to write down now a question. And is there evidence for stochastic effects during pre-implantation period? What's this the question?
Yeah.
Okay, what's next? Question.
Can the threshold doses for malformation observed in animals safely be transferred to humans?
Another question for Group B, so in utero, was the point you raised, Frido, about mental retardation. Are we so sure about the threshold at 200? Are there new results?
That's the next one, yeah.
Are we secure with a threshold at 200 for mental retardation? I have one. We discussed it only very shortly, but what is the best way to integrate, do we have to integrate the risk of cancer after in utero exposure in the detriments? Or how could we, maybe, which is more open, how could we integrate the risk of cancer after in utero exposure in the detriments?
Mm-hmm.
What is the best way? How should we? Okay, I agree. Is there enough scientific support today to justify including it's not at the time being. We know since a long time, I think, that there is cancer after in utero exposure. Is it time to, do we have enough today to integrate it?
So maybe another question is there enough, or is there incidence data on congenital malformation incidence to estimate the health impact? Estimate the health impact. After utero exposure. Yeah, but also for the baseline. Okay. Frido?
Frido, your hand raised again.
Sorry, no, I just forgot to lower my hand.
Were there other questions directly for Group B in utero exposure? For what kind of disease? But yeah, but maybe we can ask more generally, are there new information about deterministic effects after in utero exposure, especially regarding the I think there may be in the literature, there should be some information on the congenital malformation after the Chernobyl accident. But I don't know if the results are able to change anything, but there is some new information published. One question I had, but I'm afraid it's for us, is that congenital malformation appears as a deterministic effect after in utero exposure. But congenital malformation is also included in the potential heritable effects if the exposure is before conception. Is it logical in the system to have the same effect classified as stochastic on one side or deterministic on the other side, just given the fact that the exposure was before, so because of the mechanism? What is the reason for the classification? Is it based on the effect, or is it based on the mechanism, or is it based on the exposure situation? But I don't think that's a question we have to ask. That's a question that we have to answer. But if anybody has a idea on that, you're welcome. Yeah. So finally, we have very little question on in utero exposure. Is it over for Group B? Questions from Group D to Group B? Are there other questions? What do we want to know about science related to effects of in utero exposure? That's all. That's for huh? Yeah, that's for A. Yeah. Okay, so let's go with A. So questions for group A. So questions about heritable effects. So question about exposure before conception.
This question whether congenital malformation should be treated as stochastic in one case and deterministic could be also for group A. Okay. Now.
I agree, we can raise it, the question, but I'm afraid they are going to return it to us. Yeah. No, so about heritable effects. The first point is how the way it is integrated in the system right now depends on several parameters. Do we have new data to update these parameters? And maybe we have to list the parameters. So the 4 parameters, the first one is the prevalence, spontaneous prevalence of the disease. Maybe the first question is spontaneous prevalence of the disease. The second one is doubling dose or dose risk relationship, dose effect relationship, dose response. The third one is genetic dependence of the disease on the mutation, and the fourth one is transfer from mice to human. And maybe before this one, for group A, I would have what are the diseases that we think have to be considered as heritable effects. You wanted it.
No. We discussed also the difference, so environmental influence on the baseline. Is there difference, regional difference or regional difference between ethnicities? If there are data. If there are data which can be used to assess if there are differences, about differences between different ethnic groups or the different environments, regional.
And because the question of Frido on cancer, I checked. So cancer is not in the chronic disease first. And secondly, the source that is used at the time being is only from one country, Hungary. So we are the right place to discuss that. And the reference is from 1988. So it means that the data are before that. So I don't even know if there are trends, time trends, but I think we should be able today to have something better than a reference from 88. Yeah.
Mutation rates.
So additional to the first question, maybe how can methylation or epigenetic effects be respected in the DD? In the doubling dose. Oh.
Yeah, another point that we discuss is a question of number of generation. How far we which knowledge we may have to select the meaningful number of generations.
And I don't know if it's too technical, if it's a question, but the thing we saw this morning about the differences for the second generation for the calculation, that once ICRP was using the square of one term and Anscar was not using the square, or vice versa, for the calculation of the MC values. Correction, mutation correction.
Mutation component. And the mutation component was discussed in ICRP publication 83. Yes. Yes.
And this was the 0.7 and 0.7 square. 0.3.
And also the regarding correction factor 3. Correction factor 3. Yes.
Do we have evidence about those rate effects on mutation rates?
Yes.
Then maybe it's already included. Do we have a clear view of the type of effect, and is it some mutation without disease, or how we really have a good endpoint in terms of heritable effect, which may affect the population and may have an impairment on the people. So I don't know. No, but my question is the type of effect which are considered. Do we have a clear definition of impact on health, or it's only mutation on genetic mutation, but without health impact? This is what is called the mutation component, or yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, maybe the question could be: are we able today to improve the connection between the rate of mutation and probability of occurrence of a specific disease? Because at the time being it's 0, 0.3 and 0.01, which is very crude. So maybe today we can do better. And sorry. So you did what you wanted?
Fredo, you have a question or comment?
Yes, we also discussed this 0.8 lethality factor for the detriment. Can we do better than that? Can we have different severity measures for different kinds of hereditary effects? Can we and should we? So these are two questions.
But I think we have already included this in a question. And this was when we discussed about detriment. We have it for B, I think. Was it for B?
Well, if it was for B, then it's a different question, because here it is about hereditary diseases, which are all considered with a lethality factor of 0.8 in the detriment calculations. And we thought that maybe it should be different, or could be differentiated between different kinds of diseases, and then would turn out to be a more precise, more reasonable calculation of the detriment.
So far, we haven't included it because we had said that this is a question for us, how to do that. But now I understand that this is a question to the factors used in calculating the detriment, the component of heritable effects to detriment. I call it, what is the scientific basis for the weighting factors used when heritable effects are included in the detriment? It's also a bad question, but anyway. These were lethality, quality of life, and what was the third?
Again, that's a question that you have to ask.
No, but we have to ask, what is the scientific basis for choosing those values, 0.8 and 20 years, for example?
Are you there? Just after the question on what diseases have to be considered as heritable, I would add, do you think cancer should be included in the list of heritable effects? Because finally it's not. That's my mistake.
What is the role of age at exposure? We discussed.
The question is are we sure that we have to consider only people after the age at which they can conceive? According age, according sex, we have some half, maybe not for heritable, for in utero. So is there a risk of heritable effect before the age of reproductive age?
Small remarks. I just sent the link to all of you to OneDrive. So if Thierry, me, and Zolter can upload our presentations and also the list of questions, if you can upload there, so everybody have access.
So the first question is, let's begin with B, right? So is the all or nothing rule still valid for the pre-implantation phase? Question mark, please. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Next question. Is there evidence for stochastic effects during the pre-implantation period? I don't know.
I would.
Yeah, please, Frido.
Yeah. The question is stochastic effects, stochastic induction of malformation, which is again the same thing as, because cancer induction, yes, that may be, but for malformations, that's the question.
And then during the. Okay, second question, okay. Okay, next question. Can threshold doses for malformation be observed for animals, be safely transferred to humans?
Maybe safely is too strong. I suggested that, but maybe safely is too strong. It should be what, reasonably, or
Anything else for this question? Number 4, mental retardation. Are we sure with the threshold at 200 milligray?
mm-hmm.
Please. Okay. Next. In the bracket. E.g., congenital. So you know the answer already. That's tricky. That's a test whether they are really reading our questions. Yeah. Is there enough scientific information available to integrate the risk of cancer after in utero exposure in the calculation of detriment? Okay. Is there incidence data on congenital malformation after in utero exposure? And data for the baseline, for the corresponding baseline to estimate health risks. Does this make sense? It sounds a bit strange. I don't know.
What is the difference between the question before? That should be made clear.
Before is cancer.
Sorry, the second before, congenital malformations after Chernobyl. Is there new information on those? So incidence data is that not similar?
I understand it as the first line is about what do we know about the risk associated to radiation, and the last line is about what do we know about variation between different population, different country, variation in the spontaneous baseline rates. So maybe that's the last one we have to. Maybe we can bring it together, but the last one I think is there data about spontaneous incidence on congenital malformation. We are speaking here, I think, about variation of the baseline rate.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And so yes, not after exactly, yes. Is there incidence data on congenital malformation for the is there baseline incidence data on congenital malformation available today or something like that? Maybe is there baseline incidence data on congenital malformation available today for different population? That's it. That's if we want to apply it to. Yeah, maybe 2 days that needed available for different populations.
First, what are the diseases to be considered as heritable effects? Should cancer be included?
Mhm.
Okay, next. Do we have new data to update the 4 parameters in the formula? I don't know the formula for what? For the yes, for the estimation per unit dose. In the formula for the information, for the estimation of risk. Of risk per unit dose. And then so for the estimation of risk of heritable disease per unit dose. And this was the spontaneous prevalence. Or it's called baseline frequency. Yeah, this P. So baseline frequency, they call it. So we use now different wording. So you copied this from
ICP 013.
So let's keep with the wording they use. So it starts with baseline frequency instead of spontaneous prevalence. Baseline frequency. No, but okay. Doubling those, I would say, and dose effect relationship. This is our question. Yeah? Then the third one is called mutation component. They have to read it. And then potential correction factor. And what is the recoverability? A potential recoverability correction factor. Should we help them and give the equation number or the paragraph in 103? Can you do that? No, please.
Equation A6.1.
A6.1.
No, wait a moment. That doesn't have the potential factor. Sorry. That's not the complete.
Wait a minute, we have it. Box, just call it A.6.3, chapter A.6.3. Yeah.
The equation is A.6.5.
Not here. A.6.1. We have A.6.1. Yeah, that's the first. But this has no number. But what did you say? 8.6.5?
As you have it there, yeah. That's the complete one with all the 4 factors.
Wait a minute. Just down. What's that? Here, 6.3, 6.4, and yeah, 8.6.5, equation 8.6, perfect. Okay, next question. Are there data that can be used to assess any differences between ethnic groups and the environment on baseline of mutation rates? Okay. Do epigenetic effects influence the doubling dose?
Dose is only the dose that is needed to multiply the mutation rate by 2. And so epigenetic does not modify, does not create mutation. So the answer is no. But we have to complement. Do epigenetic has to be considered in addition to the doubling dose? I think you can keep that part, but add a second part. What do or to consider epigenetic in addition to mutation components. You have. Oh, I think that's okay like that.
Yes. Do epigenetic influence the risk estimation? You told it doesn't affect the doubling. It's a clear affect the estimation.
If radiation introduces epigenetic effects, then this would influence the doubling dose because you have an additional pathway. Or am I wrong? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So next question. Yeah. Next question. How many generations should we include? 2 or more? What is the reason that ICRP and ANSCA use differences in the mutation component values? It was wrong. I think the last bracket is wrong. So the last bracket. Yes. No, the bracket should be at the end. Or? I don't know. It's see. Okay.
So I was reading in ICRP 83, and the exponent is equal to the generation if you are considering a chronic, so chronic exposure over different generation, and it equal to the generation minus 1 if you have one-time exposure, burst exposure. But the formulas that are there are slightly different than this one. So I would like to read it again and try to understand better. And then I don't know, but probably the fact that once they used 1 as an exponent, that would be generation 2 minus 1, and the other one they use 2 as the exponent, which will be the generation. Maybe they had some different assumption. But again, it's still interesting to know why there are different assumptions and why they use different equations. But maybe. No, I think what is the reason, I think it remains. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe until tomorrow I can send you some information that may help to understand their answer.
Okay.
The question about the difference between NCAR and ICRP, I don't think they will be able to. They will consider that it's for them. It's a question of for I'm afraid, not for group. But well, we can let it there. Yes, we can never know. Yes, maybe one knows the answer. So what is the evidence for dose rate effect on mutation rates? For all dose effects. In that case, it's the reduction factor. Evidence for the reduction factor of B. Reduction factor. Reduction factor. Here you can add reduction factor. Reduction of 3 used There's still evidence, new evidence, okay. New evidence. Next one is, are we able to improve the connection between mutation rate and occurrence of disease? Next is, what is the scientific basis for in calculating the contribution of heritable effect to detriment? Severity weighting factors.
Yeah, once again, for this one, it's not the basis on what has been used in publication 103, but if we have new scientific basis. Yeah. Is there a scientific basis for that? And if we have new, if there is a thing new to update the value?
So at the end of the sentence, you can add, is it possible to do better today? No, that's not that one. That's the next one. Better or to update. Is there a risk for heritable effect before reproductive age? Or due to exposure before reproductive age? Is it enough? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I told them 10 questions. So
Good.
Yes.
So didn't we intend to ask them about preconception, irradiation, and avoidance of pregnancy as well? Was there any change to the evidence that would change the current ICRP position?
What was the question?
Can you formulate a short pregnant question?
suppose, is there any new evidence in relation to preconception irradiation that would change the advice on avoidance of pregnancy? So I think the current ICRP position is that there isn't any evidence to suggest avoiding pregnancy, and generally after radionuclide therapy or radiotherapy, the avoidance is down to the disease progression and avoiding pregnancy for reasons other than the radiation exposure. So it's just to check, is that still the ICRP position, or has the evidence changed?
So is there new evidence for radiation risk
For
preconception?
irradiation that would alter the advice on avoidance of pregnancy?
Can you see the text on the screen, Geraldine?
Pardon?
Do you see the text on the screen?
Is there any evidence for radiation risk? Yes, I do.
Complete the sentence.
That would alter the advice on avoidance of pregnancy.
Well, anyway, I think they should be able to understand it. And
So now A gets 11 questions and B gets how many?
6,
So
7.
6. So we have to ask our ethicist whether this is about justice.
Maybe the questions are more difficult to answer. No, I don't think so. Maybe it's just the hereditary effects are just more difficult.
You have to define weighting factors on the severity of the questions.
Yeah.
I propose to create a new point. So is it complete from what we? So is it complete? Do you have any thought to add? Do we try to have at least one question for Group C about the definition of DRF? You think you can formulate it? Just to show that we try to have questions with no S, yes, for C.
No, the only questions that we identify for Group C was to know how far heritable effects are considered in the definition of DCRL. Yeah. DC In DCRL. L. Not in the definition, in the in the selection of DCL, in the selection, yeah, in the set for the selection of DCL.
Because that's the wording they use. Heritable effects, they never use heritable effects in for non-human biota. But maybe we can play with that and let it, because that's all question for them. So. There is one more, but I'm afraid they are going to consider that it's for us also. We discussed a lot about how is it done outside of the radiation field, how heritable effects are considered after chemical exposure, or for the evaluation of risk for chemical exposure. Yes, for A. Our risk for the next generation considered, how our risk considered for the next generation considered outside of the radiation field. But I'm afraid they're going to ask us the same. The radiation. So for group C. Yeah. Okay. So in that case, we have to add a S to question. Yes. So in group A, it's is the approach to assess the risk of heritable effects coherent with what is done outside of the radiation field? Consistent, coherent, consistent with what is done outside of the radiation field. Okay, outside of the radiation field, I think. You want to repeat it for C?
Can ask the same question for group C. Yeah. So you have to put an S to question for C.
So I'm afraid for tomorrow morning we should not come only with this list of questions. We should come with some a little bit more positive points for the summary in the afternoon, so we can write it tomorrow morning.
Yeah, so my understanding is that Aidana will put something together about the hereditary effects, what we discussed and what the conclusion from it, and I would put together something from what the impact on the radiological protection system. What are the questions again, or maybe some indications of where we should go, where we should look.
No, but I think the list of questions can be in. Just that it has to be managed with some additional things around. But yeah, you have it in your presentation, in the Thierry's presentation and Aidana's presentation, I guess. I think. And tomorrow afternoon, so the compte rendu is only 1 hour and a half. maybe less, no? Because the session is 14, a quarter past 2 to a quarter to 4, sorry. And we have to discuss about the report from breakout sessions, general discussion, way forward, a plan for special issue with summary articles, and farewell. And so I think the general discussion, the way forward, and the concluding remarks, let's say it will take half an hour now. So we have 1 hour to present the report of the 4 groups. It means 15 minutes per group.
Yeah. So
I think 15 presentation of 15 is okay. More than that, I'm afraid we are not going to have enough time for discussion. Maybe less than 15. So I think it should be easy to complete. Yeah. I do not mean that it's not a real work, but don't do too much, because we are not going to have enough time. And furthermore, I'm afraid we are going to be the last group. So maybe we are not going to have even 10 minutes. So.
yeah.
So should we stop now? Other points you would like to raise? Geraldine, Frido, Clémence, nothing else?
Thank you.
No, thank you.
So thank you very much. See you tomorrow at 9. And with the same link, so it will be separated. So group D, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your boat trip.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening.